So we've documented it all. And then, like I said, we have now draft area plans for Rossville Boulevard, South Side, for Hickson. We've updated the ones, you know, that were more recent, like in Councilman Ledford's district. We've done a lot of good work. And then a big portion of this project was absolutely looking at land use and place types and all kinds of development and growth issues. But another big piece of it was looking at transportation issues. We in Chattanooga and Hamilton County have a regional transportation plan. It is our responsibility under federal laws to manage all of the transportation money that we receive from the federal government. And so when you pump your car full of gas, you send pennies to Washington, it comes back to the state of Tennessee, and then our department works with state DOT and with Hamilton County and with Public Works and the city and others to figure out how to manage funds. So that gives us a transportation plan that's required. But I tell folks that transportation plan, which was adopted recently, a few months ago, is mainly focused on federal money and mainly focused on federal and state priorities, which means it's a lot of helping manage our state highways and the interstate system. So TDOT is doing great things right now. They're working on the Hamilton Place Mall interchange. They're working on the I-2475 interchange. They're working on what I call Sara Lee Parkway, or whatever the road that highway that's going out towards one of our major employers. Anyway, thank you, McKee. Little Debbie, sorry.
Yes, sir.
I don't need a lot of, I apologize.
Sorry, Jack. If you're listening.
I don't need a lot of sweets. But I love them. I do love them. But either way, so that transportation plan is wonderful. It gets us, we have state highways that are just really key to our economy and our communities, and we really are great partners with Tennessee DOT. But having said that, we have a lot of local priorities, things that we will never have federal or state money to help pay for. And we have to really think very strategically about those. So about half of Plan Chattanooga is really trying to focus on our local transportation needs. Everything, we're probably not going to talk about paving, but everything from new sidewalks to new transit potentially, or other things in the future. What are just all the ideas we have about how we build infrastructure? And then, ultimately, we'll have a conversation about how we pay for infrastructure. So again, this little conversation was just an intro to tell you, I'm going to come back next month and give you a lot more detail about Plan Chattanooga. The thing I wanted to talk about was sort of the work that we had Chris at Cuff work on during the past year. And it was mainly trying to, again, think about how our peers in the Southeast, peer cities, fund capital projects. So we picked 5 cities in 5 different states. And the reason we did that is so we could think about that city and how it's enabled under state law to do certain things. And then we tried to pick cities that are kind of our same size, but also pick cities that are the size we will be in 20 years or 30 years. And so we picked Nashville because, unfortunately, as much as folks love or hate Nashville, Nashville within the state of Tennessee is using state laws that we have the same state laws, more or less, let's just say, to finance capital. We looked at Charlotte, we looked at Huntsville, Greenville, and Cobb County, Georgia, which is where the Atlanta Braves play baseball, down in Marietta and Smyrna. So those 4 cities in one county are really folks that, in some cases, maybe they finance capital infrastructure in very conventional ways, and then in some cases they have a long history of very successful capital finance, like Cobb County as an example. And so we hired Chris to kind of really dig into this and think about it, because again, it's really just trying to help us understand what are our other peers doing around the South. What are going to be our challenges in the future in terms of growth, and then how do we get what are some of the ideas that we might be able to have to pay for things in the future. So nothing happening today about recommendations from Chris. He's here to answer questions. And this report, which we've had on our website for about a month or two, it's not been really, we haven't distributed it far and wide. but he's going to can answer questions about it. In general, again, the reason that we're doing this is because, you know, it's my hope in the coming months after we adopt the comprehensive plan for the city, and we have a comprehensive plan underway for the county, that we can then have a conversation about, you know, the vision, the growth, the future of our city, how we hope we can pay for infrastructure in the future, what are our options, and we'll just be able to have a very, very rational conversation about what our needs are. I'll steal the last slide I had Eric put in, but I'll say it now. In 1980, you know, I grew up in Georgia and worked in Metro Atlanta for, not in 1980, I'm not that old. But in 1980, the census had Cobb County about roughly the size as Hamilton County is today. In 1980, and in the early 80s, the state of Georgia allowed local governments to do SPLOST, Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. In I think 1984, or Chris or Eric will correct me, they passed the first SPLOST, one of the first ones in Georgia, in Cobb County. They passed $248 million SPLOST for capital transportation projects. They didn't actually change the SPLOST law for a number of years. For about 10 years, the only thing you could use SPLOST on was transportation. And so Cobb County, I think 4 or 5 years later, did another $298 million. Now, I'm not saying those are the kinds of amounts of money that we necessarily are going to need in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, but
we could use it.
my daughter lives in Smyrna, and I drive Cobb County a good bit, and they have pretty good infrastructure, pretty good sidewalks, pretty safe. You know, it's very suburban. It's not an urban place really, but it's definitely, they've definitely invested in their infrastructure. So that's my intro today, and I'm going to turn it over to Chrissy Cuff unless somebody has.
Well, just on the spot, so we work with entities in Georgia making a lot of the signage at because, you know, that's part of the requirements. And so we understand the standards, and we do. So I see it a lot coming through the office, and it, you know, I know this is a state level issue, but it gives people a choice to do that, and it's project specific, and it has a time frame, and that's what's so appealing about it. I just, you know, maybe you know, we could kick that up a little bit and have some better conversation. But there's obviously reasons that it's not happening. But boy, is it a useful tool, and people get to vote on it.
Yeah, and
if you want, I mean, that's awesome.
And it sunsets after a certain, after they've raised the funds to pay for all the capital, that, you know, the highway projects, other things. So I'm gonna go ahead.
So thinking about SPLOST just a little bit more, and not to get too far in the weeds, but Cobb County is a county. We are a city. So am I right to understand that if we were to do a SPLOST, that there would be a split city-county?
And in the case of Georgia cities and counties, they work together to negotiate what's the split.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yep. Chris, you want to come up to the table? Or Eric, sorry. No introduction needed.
Well, Danny, I think you gave a good introduction. I wanted to come and we can have these conversations about potential techniques that other of these peer cities are using, but wanted to be able to give, if I can switch over, a little bit of a context of the city's budget, particularly as we're coming into the fiscal year 25, what the capital funding situation and our projections for the future really look like, grounded in particular in what you all have just been doing. So you've looked at a version of this, but just to orient you a little bit, this is the overall size of the capital budget for the last 6 years, including the FY25 budget that was just adopted. We'll focus primarily on the blue, which is a general fund, enterprise fund, with the wastewater and stormwater are primarily self-funded. The general fund is kind of encompassing most of the other capital expenditures for the city. We'll get into a little bit of detail. This is just for those general fund dollars, so the blue bars in the previous graph, looking a little bit more closely at the funding sources. I'll call it FY20, FY23, and 25 were the largest ones with that. FY20, you can see we had received quite a bit of external funds, more than we had in previous years. Represents a couple of FEMA disasters and funding that came through that. FY23, part of the yellow bar that I'll call out there is some of the ARP funds the city allocated in the capital budget that year. In FY25, we can get into a little bit more, but it's also quite a bit larger. To dig into that a little bit more, the approved general fund capital budget that you all approved a few weeks ago is just over $93.8 million this year. That was after the increase of about $18 million that you considered. To put that in perspective, compared to what departments requested this year across all of their different needs, there are 165 projects from general fund departments, totaling over 176.8 million. So we funded about 53% of what departments requested across all of those different needs. So again,
Capital needs,
what's that?
capital needs.
Capital needs, yes, thank you. And I'll say that that represents really just what they were requesting this year. This is not encompassing everything that is included in the capital improvement plan that looks out for the next 4 years. So these are needs that they're identifying, and deferring that means that most of those needs will continue to roll over for future years. This also doesn't encompass, as Dan was saying, infrastructure and other needs that we may have as we continue to grow as a community. To dig into that a little bit more, just to be a little bit more specific about it, the requests that we received for fleet-related capital expenditures, so this would be vehicles that are not currently in our lease program, brand new vehicles, specialty vehicles like garbage trucks, as well as fueling infrastructure. Departments requested over $27.4 million. We were able to fund about 8.5 of that. So garbage trucks, fire apparatus, vehicle fueling infrastructure. There was an increase between the initial draft capital budget and what was approved of 2.3, but we were able to fund about 31% of departmental requests. Similarly for maintenance, this is across all departments and types of maintenance. This would be facilities, major maintenance of facilities, parks maintenance, roadway maintenance, paving, bridges, as well as technology, the maintenance for technology services. Over $83.7 million were the requests. We funded almost 38.7. So about 46% of that. As you can see, needing to make some choices and prioritization about how those get spent across major facilities maintenance, deferred maintenance for parks, major roadway maintenance, and again, paving, bridge maintenance, roadway rebuilding, et cetera. Just to give you a sense of what that looks like. To zoom out a little bit, the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, TASER, their most recent report from January of this year, Building Tennessee's Tomorrow, that identifies the cost of needed infrastructure statewide. They only break it down by county. We don't have it by local municipality, but they are identifying $3.8 billion of infrastructure needs across the county. They have it broken down by category, so just removing education and public health facilities, which would not be something that the city is responsible for. We're still talking about $2.9 billion. Wow. Again, that is across more than just the city's municipal boundaries as well as the city's responsibilities. But as a community, think about significant needs for infrastructure.
Eric, go deeper of what that encompasses.
This would include everything from roads, if we think about the large number.
Roads, bridges.
Schools, public health, utilities.
All roads.
This would be all roads.
All roads, not just state roads. Not,
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
And it's a pretty generalized, high-level number. I'm not sure they know Hunter Road's gonna cost X dollars to widen or improve. They are kind of looking at, I'm sure they have a methodology, but it'd be interesting to dig into that.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and to your point, Dan, that's exactly right. Projects or items that are in discussion, such as Snow Hill and Hunter Road, are those in this calculation? Are they, as TASER, aware of those conversations?
Part of what TASER does in terms of their methodology is have jurisdictions, counties, and local municipalities identify what their projected needs are. And I'm not sure if the county specifically identified Snow Hill as one, but that is a portion of what they are considering, yes.
It could be buildings.
Many thousands of people would identify it, I know that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Does this also include, like stormwater, sewer,
It does.
those types
It
of
does.
capital?
Yep, it does.
Good question, that's where I was going
Yeah,
next.
it does.
Thanks.
Yeah. So it's not apples to apples in terms of what the city's capital budget would encompass in any given year, but really just trying to paint a picture of what that overall need in terms of the community is. Again, to zoom out, so if we know that from year to year, our existing funds are meeting just a portion of the identified annual needs, and with anticipated growth, as Dan was mentioning, as well as deferred capital expenses, those future needs are going to continue to grow. The longer it takes for us to complete a project, the more expensive it becomes. So how are we meeting that? There's no magic answer, but a couple of strategies that we are already employing. So changes in capital budgeting that you all have been considering. I'll point out for the last 3 years, we've seen a significant increase in the bonds that were issued, starting in fiscal year 23 and continuing in 24 and 25, as well as an increase in the operating and the reserves, particularly this year, that was going to have the red bar. We need to make sure that we're utilizing our existing resources really effectively, making sure that departments are identifying and expending those projects, moving them forward, as well as identifying the needs long-term, as Dan mentioned, through Plan Chattanooga as a way to build on the good planning work that has happened, whether the Parks and Outdoors Plan, the Regional Transportation Plan, thinking about land use changes over time, how we're planning for all of those things, and then also learning from regional peers.
You know, can I say something about that? I think the work of Plan Chattanooga is critical in this, like, if we were to pursue a SPOS, for example, I use that as an example because people feel like it's a relatively easy to understand tool that the public can get behind or not get behind. When I think about Cobb County as that example, I think of a whole lot of really wide concrete roads with long spans and traffic light and a long, you know, and so that makes that Plan Chattanooga work so important because I don't think we want to become that. Even if they could be shiny roads with no potholes, do we want everything to be a 6-lane or 12-lane divided highway to get us out further and further into the county? I think the folks in the county would say, not really.
So, excuse me, I would sort of, just for the sake of the discussion, take the ability to finance capital goods and strip them away from the idea of suburbanization. Because Cobb is the most suburban, you know, story of Metro Atlanta. I mean, it was suburbanized before anybody else. They built the Bob, during World War II, they built the Bell Bomber plant, which is now Lockheed Martin. City of Atlanta ran sewer out there and makes, you know, it was grew during the prime period of suburbanization in the United States.
Well,
So, I mean, I think
yeah.
nobody wants to be Cobb County, I guess my point.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you add a new concrete capital into our list.
Well, I think because they do good financing.
Right, okay, and so we can appreciate that, but
They have money.
I guess I just want to put a fine point on the fact that the planning work that we're doing, where we've gotten so much public input on what we as Chattanoogans and Hamilton County citizens want our community to be, is really important as we find ways to fund what our community wants, not what somebody else thinks we should
Exactly.
have.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. Eric, so this year we dipped into our reserve funds of 20 million, is that correct?
The total was more than that. There was an additional 15 that went towards it.
Okay, so, but we dropped our calculation with 34 to 30,
Right.
down to 30%, and I understand that, and it's still a conservative model, which I'm glad to see, but we can't sustain that forever. So when we talk about priorities for infrastructure improvement or allocation, do you or can you share any of the administration's strategies on that? Because we can't do that every year.
I think we certainly can't dip into reserves in that way every
Correct,
year.
correct.
That is only, as that chart showed, only one of the ways that we fund capital projects
Right.
in any given year, right? So I think we need to continue to look at what those other funding sources are, how we're continuing to do that, build the overall capital plan, I think both for 1 year and future years. I think as a community, and this is true for communities across the region, like there isn't going to be a single funding source existing or that we may have in the future that's going to solve all of our infrastructure needs. There's some that are going to be tied more specifically to certain things, and some that might be a little bit more open-ended. I think that to build on Councilman Hill's point, like thinking about what our overall needs are through that planning process, and as a really important part of that is understanding what priorities are across the city. We can't do everything all at once. It helps us to start to build towards what a recurring, ongoing, sustainable funding strategy would be towards that, I would say.
hence this
That's a
research.
good political answer, Eric. I like it. Good job. I like it.
I'll go into this a little. These are the cities that Dan had mentioned that we looked at. Just a quick comparison. This is looking back using Census Bureau data. So it's a few years old, looking at what the per capita capital expenditures are across cities, both across the Southeast and then across the country as a whole. This would have increased a little bit. That little blue bar representing Chattanooga would have been going up over the last couple of years as we've seen that larger increase in our capital budget, but just as a comparison. And Chris, I might turn to you a little bit. These are a couple of strategies. There's more detail in the report that we have called out just for consideration and that various cities are using across the region. Some of these are not going to be applicable both to Tennessee cities and to the city of Chattanooga in particular, but they are examples of other things that people do. To go into detail about each of them. While we think about this, might go back. I'll skip ahead. This is what Dan mentioned about Cobb County. 1985, the Cobb County population, I just looked at the Hamilton County population in 2022 was about 374,000, so pretty close to what Cobb County was almost 40 years ago. Those are the SPLOSTs that were approved over those 40 years in between. They had a couple that were not approved. Again, totaling $3.8 billion over that time. And inflation adjusted, I'm not sure what that would be, but even larger than that.
And all of those were referenda.
They were, that's correct.
Wow.
So the people decided.
That's right. Yep.
And I think the first three were transportation only, and then after that, I think they added schools and other things to it.
So they got into the E's and, okay.
Nice.
I will say that the way that Georgia uses SPLOST in terms of this, the Tennessee legislature has not enabled counties and cities in Tennessee to do that in the same way at the moment.
Yes.
Would you go back one slide? The one thing I would point out is that for a decade now, Nashville has been trying to have a transportation referendum. 5 years ago, you remember they tried to have light rail, and it failed. They have come back this fall. There's a referendum, as Eric's at the title there. I haven't. We can talk about their project mix, but it's a lot of highway, corridor improvements, sidewalks, traffic intersections, transit, and it seems to be polling pretty well. So in terms of transportation projects, we do have the ability to do something similar to what they are attempting in Nashville. But we'll find out how that goes this fall.
Eric, are you gonna touch on
Yep.
any of these?
Well, we have
Or
the
is
expert here,
Chris?
so.
I can. We can both.
I was like, I'm happy just to open up a general discussion, or if I can answer specific questions, I can give you
Come sit at the
the, I can give you the
Come
rundown.
Yeah.
join us at the
This
table.
is the cool kids table, I can.
Is there one in particular?
Well, there's no cool kids table, but you're welcome to join us.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you again.
Appreciate it. So some of the high-level stuff of this is in the executive summary, if you want to look kind of through this on the first page I did. I think some of the big takeaways, I would say, most of the comparison cities and county we looked at have basically dedicated funding sources that go straight to capital every year. You know, it's essentially not discretionary upon the council or commission to allocate a certain amount each year depending on the financial circumstances, either through state law or ordinance. A certain portion is allocated every year, which I think helps a little bit with long-term capital planning. You know roughly, you know, with caveats to financial projections, what you're gonna have every year. You know that if you wanna add some new bridge or some new park or whatever it is, that, oh, we're gonna need to borrow $20 million or come up with some other way of increasing the pot of money. So I think that's one of the big takeaways.
Is it percentages or flat fee, flat rates?
Usually it's percentages. So for instance, in North Carolina, in Alabama, a few other states, they have a certain amount of the sales tax allocated that goes straight to capital. So it's somewhere between, like, let's say 0.5% to 1% of their sales tax is dedicated it goes straight into a capital fund.
So was it set up like that, when I say from the beginning? I mean, like, was it was it kind of always set up, as, I guess, let me ask it this way. At some point, did they pass a percentage of sales tax and said, this will always go to capital improvement?
Yeah, so I didn't look back on the legislative history. A lot of it just comes from the state. So the state allocated within its portion, basically they said that this amount will go to municipalities or counties, that percent of the sales tax will go. I'm not sure how far back that goes though.
I just wonder if it was at some point set up and they said, we're gonna add a half a cent
Right.
for our sales.
So yeah, effectively they did
And
do
it will
that,
be
right.
dedicated to capital.
Yeah, at some point in the past, right, they did set that up like
Yeah.
that. So they added it on top of whatever
They added
exists
it on
already.
top,
Right.
said this will be a percentage that goes to capital improvement.
Right, exactly.
It looks like Charlotte has done with their pay-as-you-go, a portion of the property tax rate is also dedicated.
Right. So they have several funding streams that come in. Like Nashville, for instance, they allocate a certain amount of their property tax that come from the general services district, which is basically just the county, into capital improvements for the general services district. So by ordinance, they allocate that, so they have chosen to do that as a metro commission, basically however many years ago. So again, it's something you could consider, or not, but just kind of trying to give you a menu of options. I think on the other bar chart comparing some of the other municipalities regionally and nationwide, I think it's indicative. I think as a state as a whole, we're generally a pay-as-you-go state. We're generally, fairly low tax, fairly low expenditure state, so those things go hand in hand. We generally have low debt here, which again is good and somewhat restrictive in terms of like future financial planning, I think. So, just making decisions about, I think, what kind of tools you want to use going forward as the city continues to grow. I think the things to think about in terms of, debt and things like that, we talk about like generational equity. So if you have these things you want to see over the next 30, 40, 50 years, making a decision of whether or not it's more equitable to fund it now or fund it sort of as you go, pay as you use essentially versus pay as you go, I think is another consideration. So obviously, I wouldn't advocate, taking on mountains of debt. That's not a good thing. But I think for maybe specific projects where it's warranted, you could use that, which also then frees up, general operating fund revenue for other projects too. So not only just growing the pot of money overall, but I think if certain amounts are set aside, whether it's percentage based or whatever, for certain capital projects, then you have other funds that frees up to pay for other priorities that the council and the administration has, I think.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
So thinking about that concept of generational equity is interesting, based on the point that you made, Eric, about money is always cheaper now than it will be later. And it makes me think about like our parks plan, for example, and how we look at the map of what the parks plan was originally put together, and it had multiple places where there would be parks. And now we've expanded beyond that boundary into, say, District 4, further into District 6, further into District 5. But we didn't, as a city, we didn't gather up land when land was cheaper then. And we didn't build parks when parks were less expensive then. So now we have, in a way, we didn't pay as we went, we just didn't do anything, right? But now we have some level of, wait, we want to use our community differently. We would like a park. We recognize that would increase our quality of life. So that's just an interesting concept for our council to explore of, I know I personally love the idea of pay as you go, save up your money, do what spend the money you have, not money you don't. But also investment for the future is very important.
I think one thing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
To kind of expand on that, so you're exactly right. So I'm glad you mentioned District 4 because we have one park.
You bet. I'm always going to root for you, man.
Like, none of us could forget that.
They are, that I'm doing my.
He's doing his job.
I'm doing
Yeah.
my job. And that was in 2000 when Councilman Eves and Mayor Kinsey and the council got together and purchased that land. And now here we are in 2024, and we're working with Trust for Public Land, working with the Parks and Outdoors and the administration to secure another 15 acres for another park that went up for sale and not have it be turned into a a parking lot or just more townhomes, which is fine, we need housing. But to that mindset,
We have multiple priorities all at the same time.
that's correct, yeah, but I think we're moving in that I'm glad you mentioned that because I've heard some really good things about the quality and building up on our parks. They're busy,
Yeah.
they're busy areas.
Councilwoman, another way to think about that is, if we want park improvements 2 or 3 years from now, or if we want sidewalk improvements, or Airport Road, or some other kind of,
I'm here. I know.
some
we've
other
been
kind
working
of,
on it.
transit, a transit center, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we have to start today.
Right.
We will never see those projects. We don't really have any projects that are shovel-ready per se, and if we wanna have shovel-ready or any kind of projects, years in the future, we have to start now. We have to start conceiving of them, developing what are the parameters of these projects, the design, if they involve right-of-way, and then obviously get to the point of construction. And with federal money, that is almost a decade every time you think of a federal project, because you just add a lot of rules and other steps. With local money, it's still, if we had $100 million today, things that we want to build, and it would be 5 years from now if the
Yeah,
money was
we
in the
would be
bank.
ready, yeah, you're right.
So that's kind of why we're here today, is to really just get us, thinking that we know we're growing, we are growing with families in our schools and natural population, we're growing with people moving here, we're growing with jobs. That's all wonderful, but it will absolutely over time create bigger demands on our infrastructure.
Different
Mr.
demands.
Chair. Mr. Chair,
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
okay, sorry. So, I like the pay-as-you-go idea. But in the long run, I mean, I'd enlarge on that. In the long run, will it be less expensive to overpay as you go? Because the longer you wait, the more, and I'm picking up on what you said, Dan. If we had been, a big thing we're working out is getting the airport not to look like the last picture show, right? Around the airport, and we've been looking at all kinds of things there. But if we had been buying up stuff along there, even overbuying stuff, and I'm talking about bonds, not from our savings account, in the long run, it would have been much cheaper when we look at what it's gonna cost us now
Right.
to do it. So, yeah, you pay as you go, but I'm wondering if it's not penny wise and pound foolish if we don't, for lack of a better word, overpay as you go, so that you accumulate more sooner, even though it's not in your cookie jar. Because when it gets time to do what you wanna do, you have to be shovel ready, so you have to pay and accumulate ahead of time.
So it feels like it becomes a both and, where
Yes,
we have,
yes.
we create this economic toolkit, which is what you all have been studying on our behalf of, here's all these different tools, which ones meet our values
Right.
and our objectives, and then we codify that and work within that
Yeah.
system.
Thank you, that was just something I was thinking.
So Dan, I don't think Tennessee state law allows us to create a splosh. Is that correct?
Well, again, a SPOS in the case of Georgia can be spent on, at this point, I think, almost all kinds of infrastructure, from schools to roads to parks. I think you can spend SPOS on a lot of things. In Tennessee, Chris, you're gonna have to help me with the law that allows Nashville to have their referendum this fall.
The Improve Act.
The Improve Act gives you something like that, but it's never really been used. So Nashville's trying to use it for the first time. It will give them, I think, the ability to have a little bit greater sales tax. I think it's a half cent. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah.
Above what is currently allowed.
Yeah, they're going for half cent. I think the law allows you to do up to the 2.75.
So it's kind of a complex law, and I think when they created it years ago, I think they did that because they wanted to have a lot of options. But I think they've struggled with figuring out how to obviously get it approved, you know, and so they're trying again this fall.
To get it approved locally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if I could add that, so I think in Tennessee, I mean, you all know this, but Chattanooga could have essentially an extra, let's say 0.5% on top of the sales tax that we currently have for local option. I think to Councilman Ledford's point, as make it earlier, basically kind of the three characteristics of the SPLOST. I mean, there's a finite time period, it's for specific projects and it's approved by the voters. I mean, here, I mean, you would have to have a referendum on the increase in the sales tax. You could, although I don't know of many places that do this, put a time period on it, although, again, I don't know of many or any local governments that have done that in Tennessee. But I think, and Mr. Nalba can correct me, but all of the sales tax revenue by law for municipalities goes to the general fund. So the council could restrict it for certain uses if you wanted to, but the voters then wouldn't have the option of saying, yes, we want these things for specific purposes that are outlined in the referendum, basically. So you could do something similar-ish, but it's not a true, I guess, SPLOST in Georgia sense, really.
We do not have an enabling statute right now that would allow that.
What's your hypothesis on what would hold Tennessee back from enacting a SPLOST very similar to Georgia's?
So, I mean, the General Assembly would basically have to give you that
No,
tool.
no,
Oh, sorry,
I get the how.
Oh, sorry.
I want the political, tell us the
Why?
political landscape.
Oh.
Why wouldn't we? What's working against a SPLOST in Tennessee?
I don't know if I have an answer for that. I'll just say, based on Georgia's case, I mean, at least anecdotally, these are overwhelmingly approved and reapproved by the voters. I mean, in the cases that I'm familiar with, including Catoosa County and a few others that have done it recently. So politically, I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but.
You know, a lot of the things that Georgia has done, like SPLOST or CIDs or, even the way, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's about economic development. I mean, there's just, state legislature, political, sometimes I call it the public-private partnership, because it's absolutely a very pro-growth, pro-business state, and I think they've been that way for, since I graduated school. So, I mean, I think it's just a different mindset about growth. I think it's driven by the business community, honestly, and the development community.
Yeah, if I can weigh in a little bit too, I've been spending a lot of time in Nashville, working with legislature. We got our housing thing passed, which is just extraordinarily helpful. And the way we were able to do that, as an example, is we put strong guardrails in, right? I think the legislature, any member of that body in Nashville would tell you that, they have some concerns over some things that some cities in Tennessee do. And so their concern is sort of ceding unlimited power, unlimited taxing authority, and seeing that, in their view, be abused for something other than its intended purpose. So, as you look at, asking for something like potential new revenue authority, I think a key part of that ask is going to be what guardrails are you willing to put in to govern how and where that can be used and deployed to the satisfaction of the legislature, so that in the edge cases that they too often see in many other cities, that's not going to be misappropriated, misdeployed in their view, right? Is that a fair assessment?
I think.
I mean, that's interesting though, when you think that the voters have to approve the project, but the state legislature would deem the project inappropriate. That's interesting. While the Improve Act sends money into a general fund and therefore has less accountability than a standard SPLOST. So it sounds to me like there's opportunity for conversation there.
100%.
Okay. Well, they're giving us stuff to do.
Well, again, we will have next month, lots of ideas of how to spend money through our Plan Chattanooga. And it's just that, Plan Chattanooga, initially the drafts of the area plans and everything, it is literally just trying to put the best ideas, the best information we heard from the public, transportation needs, all in one place so we can all talk about it. And think about it, and the council can vote on something in the coming months.
Dan, let me throw something out here. Huntsville, I think, has really taken off probably in the last decade. And And are they experiencing, I mean, when you're doing your research, are they experiencing, the growing pains that we seem to be experiencing here? You know, in Planning Commission Monday, there was a proposal to, for a rezone that was gonna put 35 townhomes, in a community. And obviously, the number one concern, right off the top, is traffic. And I get it. And really and truly, I don't know how we can't build enough roads to satisfy the growth that we need. So what did Huntsville do? I mean, when you was doing any research, are they experiencing the same, I mean, are they to the point that, you know, people are now coming out of the woodwork screaming, no more rezoning, no more development?
I think that's probably a universal problem.
Or did they do something unique that kind of helped them avoid that?
No, I mean, I didn't really get that, let's say, close to the ground in terms of like land use type stuff. So no, off the top of my head, no. I mean, like any city that's growing, I mean, I went to Huntsville, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago for the first time in, let's say, a decade or more, and was just shocked at how much has developed in the last couple of years. But I think that they're like any city. I mean, again, they're growing not exponentially, but fairly steadily. I don't think there's anything unique to Huntsville that I noticed that, you know, would necessarily give us any clues as what to do better in terms of like a planning perspective. I think any city that grows like that just inherently just faces those challenges.
I mean, I think you mentioned Snow Hill Road or Hunter Road earlier a while ago. I mean, I don't know how you build that road out and improve it to the point that it's gonna handle the capacity that they're gonna be seeing, you know, I mean, it's just almost impossible. It's almost like you know, we've expanded and we've pushed our growth out that way. And I don't know, I think it comes back to our public transportation and how we do that better here and handle the large increase in a tighter circle as opposed to stressing our infrastructure out in our rural or suburb
You're
areas.
definitely correct about Hunter and Snow Hill. They're both pretty major. We don't have the right of way there, first of all. And then the geometry of those roads is kind of crazy. And so we've kind of got to the point where we've had enough development there that, and the commission knows this, county commissioners, at least the ones in those districts, that we can't build out at the same density some of those projects across that entire area, because there's just not enough. We're gonna put people in cars all morning long waiting to get to work, sitting at, you know,
Yeah.
trying to get. So I think county commission has understood now that that's a challenge for us. But having said that, I absolutely try to be honest with folks and tell them we're gonna grow. We're not gonna, I know there's a historical story about Chattanooga. That's not our future. Our future is gonna be pretty steady growth, probably for a long, long time. And so I think the challenge is, yes, every month, the development community and somebody wants to rezone property, and it's usually because they're in the business to do that. And so we have to get really, better at how we do planning, and so that y'all have better, parameters or guidance and things. I mean, but we're gonna have developers and folks trying to rezone things where the land's cheap. And I like to say when we rezone, it's kind of like we're raining money, right? And so, that's just an easy way to think about it. They're gonna benefit, from in some way. But to your point, we have rezonings happening right now in the county that are absolutely happening because there's not a capacity to live affordably, or at least within the price point of most people, closer to their jobs. But absolutely, we want to promote and encourage and give folks every reason they can to live as close to their jobs as possible. Because we right now today have probably 120,000 people that stay in this city and this county every day, work and live in the city and county. We have 91,000 folks that drive to the county every day for a job. And so those 91,000 folks partly are doing it because they can live cheaper somewhere else. But I think these kinds of challenges are gonna be on us for a long, long time. We just have to get a lot better at managing it. That's why we took on doing a city-wide and a county-wide plan.
Councilman Hester, did you have a?
I'm just curious, why do we not include a city like, city and county, Montgomery County and Clarksville? Because their population is gonna probably projecting to exceed our population, so.
I think we
And-
just picked, Chris and I and Eric just, just thought we wanted to have one in each state.
Okay,
But I think, I think those would be great examples. And again, I don't, to Councilwoman Hill's comment earlier, absolutely, we could talk about, Cobb County and how it got that way, and do they even like it? I think a lot of folks in Cobb don't like the way it is now. But learning from these communities is what we're trying to figure out, what are the best things we can bring back, and then put it within the vision of what this council wants to do.
Yeah,
All right, Councilwoman Burke.
What part, I've got a case today that's kind of a perfect example of the perfect storm. I don't wanna go into that. What part does public welfare or safety considerations play in determination?
I think it's almost number one, right? I mean, when you think about what's the purpose of a local government, it starts with safety.
Well, so when we're in zoning, right, somebody is coming in to get something rezoned, so we're talking about zoning. And we've had a couple of cases in my district where people aren't really necessarily against the rezoning. Well, the Snow Hill and, that Hunter Road thing was right outside my district. They have righteous concerns about the roads, which is public safety. So we know from decisions that we can't turn something down unless there's a valid reason and testimony and to a valid reason on record. So if the road's too narrow, is that a valid reason? And I'm doing some circular thinking. So even though people are not against the housing, which we need, what's the balancing point relative to the safety issues?
Our city attorney doesn't like when I speak law, so. I'm kidding, but I would say local government authority for zoning is very strong. And when a developer or somebody comes in to rezone their land, and we get challenged on that, you're not challenged on the zoning they were asking for, you get challenged on whether their existing zoning is legal. But I guess my point is just to say, to answer your question, we probably couldn't just deny somebody rezoning just based on transportation, unless we were consistently doing that, I guess, in every case.
I think that's one of the things you have to consider.
Right, and how do you weigh that? I'm listening to y'all talk about roads, and I've heard Chip talk a lot about building on narrow roads, just in general, the conversations we've had. What sort of weight does public welfare have, for lack of a better,
In the case of a rezoning
Yeah.
decision,
There's clearly no absolute right to a rezoning of property in a case. You have to look at that in the interest of health, safety, and welfare of the community when you're doing
all right,
it.
so the road's too narrow and people are piling up. Is that good enough?
I think it's good enough unless you're intentionally making that road that narrow so no one can develop that area. That could be another issue on here where the city would be restricting development outside because of that.
if it was me, and this is hypothetical,
Yeah.
nothing specific, if we had a zoning case and we felt like it was just not the right zoning case because of infrastructure, it could be everything, schools, it could be water, I would say, our staff does this. We try to build the case so that when council makes a decision, it is ironclad legal. That's my goal. I want y'all to 100% of the time to feel like your decisions are gonna stand. And so we try to say everything that's possibly a reason that, if it's traffic, if it's, whatever we think could be the issue, we will try to identify that. Because if it ever goes to court, that zoning report is part of the evidence.
Dan, how much emphasis do you think we're gonna rely more on TIS with cases, and will that become a fixture in the zoning decision in the future, as if we're going to use infrastructure, access, public roads, whatnot.
I think the reason we're doing a plan update, a comprehensive plan citywide, all at one time, is to give you all exactly what you're talking about, to give you the best case and the best, information to make good decisions that are unbiased as much as we can be, that give the city strong positions to make growth decisions. I mean, you can still choose to make whatever decision you want, but when y'all make a decision, I want y'all to feel like it's strong. And I think our city attorney does too. He's
Refer to, yes.
Especially the city attorney.
So, I mean, I think we're headed in that direction, and I try not to think about the past much, because, the way I want us to be as professional with the way we do planning and infrastructure projections and finance and all that stuff as much as we can be. I mean, and I think that's, you know, what our job is.
One last thing, Mr. Chairman, so, when we bring in a new business, and Chris, I don't know if you've looked into this as well, but let's say you're trying to attract a company that has a couple of shifts maybe. And are we working with them in respect to when traffic is moving through? Let's say, for example, there's a school nearby. Yeah, let's maybe not have the plant down the street start at the exact same time or get out at the exact same. Are we intentional in that development? And if we're not, my goodness, why wouldn't we be? That's called planning. To at least make an attempt or try our best to mitigate those situations.
Well, you'll see it, I would bet if y'all start paying attention, you'll see, you can leave your house 10 minutes later, and I swear the traffic feels different. And I live a mile and a half from here. But if you think about, I was talking to someone who was driving back from the holidays, and they're like, well, I'm looking on Waze. Well, Waze is telling you, or Google is telling you what traffic's happening in the last hour. It's not thinking that there's a transportation system here where trucks left the port of Savannah
Right.
4 hours ago, and they
Yeah.
hit here about 1 o'clock.
That's
You
what
can see all
quantum is
this in the
for.
data.
Quantum's gonna fix that.
That's right, AI.
Wait, right now, for real?
But I'm just
Quantum,
saying,
remember?
we do,
He
we
promised.
are,
You promised, that's right.
Promise.
there is the ability now to look at data on all these traffic models and where people are coming and going. You can kind of figure out, there's a big hump in the middle of our day when a lot of that traffic coming from south of us or north of us is going through Chattanooga.
Right.
And so I tell you, leave as early as possible, when you go somewhere.
Mr. Chair, we could talk about this for hours.
All I can tell you is the ridge cut's backed up every day, starting about 2 o'clock.
That's right.
So
Yes, sir.
That's,
Exactly.
I have learned Brainerd Road is the long way home.
Thanks, now you're clogging up.
Yes, ma'am,
my
I go
road.
right by your house, that's me on.
Dan, Eric, or Chris,
I
any
honk at
last,
you every day.
anything else you wanna add? That quick?
We will be back next month with more information if y'all let us come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Council,
Yeah, come back.
anything else that would need to be brought up at this time? If not, we will take a break until 3:30. Anything?
I will need a short attorney-client session.
You will? Yeah.
Good improvement.